Katerina began her questioning. Mr. Nicolaides, you testified. Heavy rumble that filled the courtroom. He pointed at me, then at the witness stand. Is that the woman you saw? Theodota stared straight at me, her eyes wide but her chin held steady. A tremor ran through her voice as she answered, Yes, that is Sophia Patelis. My lawyer, Katerina, scribbled furiously. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. This was it, the moment my life shattered. And what did you see? Mrs. Petrikis, the prosecutor pressed. Theodota took a deep breath. Her gaze didn't waver from mine, and it held a strange, desperate plea. I saw Sophia Patelis at the old windmill that night. She was arguing with Mr. Vangelis loudly about money, about a tour gone wrong, and then I saw her push him. A gasp rippled through the gallery. Katerina was on her feet, a furious objection already forming on her lips. My mind screamed, Push him? Theodota, no. Why are you doing this? My world had always been papeterie, an island of sun-drenched stone and sapphire seas. I lived and breathed this place. Ran my family's small pilgrimage tour business. Built it with my own hands from the old windmill, our home, our office, every winding path, every hidden chapel. I knew like the back of my hand. I poured my life into sharing its beauty, its history, and people trusted me. They saw the care, the honesty. That trust was my reputation, my livelihood. It was everything. Then Dimitris Nicolaides arrived, a sleek, charming predator in a sharp suit. He wanted to buy me out, expand his hotel empire. I refused. I wouldn't sell my heritage, my home. He smiled and said he understood, but his eyes held a different message. The first whisper started subtly, small complaints about my tours. Then a bigger one, a client, an elderly German tourist named Herr Vangelis, went missing during one of my excursions. We searched for days. Captain Yaronis, a friend of my father's and the local police chief, led the search. He found Herr Vangelis' body near a treacherous cliff path, not far from the old windmill. The official ruling was an accidental fall, but Dimitris had a way of making it sound like more. Such a tragedy. Sophia, he said, his voice laced with false sympathy. It reflects poorly on the island and on your business. His words were a chisel, slowly chipping away at my foundation. A month later, the police came to the old windmill. Captain Yaronis looked uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes. Sophia, he said, his voice quiet, we've had a new development in the Vangelis case. My heart jumped. What is it? A witness came forward, Theodota Patrikis. She claimed she saw something implicating you. My breath caught. Theodota. She worked at the bakery, a quiet, religious woman. She barely left her house, let alone wandered near the old windmill at night. Why would she say anything? What could she possibly have seen? The formal charge came swiftly, involuntary manslaughter. The police claimed I had been negligent, that my tour route was unsafe, but after Theodota's testimony, the charge was upgraded. Now, they were saying I pushed him, me, Sophia Patelis. It was a joke, a cruel, elaborate joke. My life, my reputation, my everything hung by a thread. The trial began like a slow-motion nightmare. Each day, another piece of my life was picked apart. My lawyer, Katerina, a sharp woman from Athens, worked tirelessly, but the prosecution painted a clear picture. Sophia Patelis, desperate for money, cutting corners, then losing her temper when a client threatened her business. And then there was Theodota, the perfect witness. I sat in the courtroom, numb, as the prosecutor called her to the stand. Theodota walked with small, measured steps, her traditional black dress rustling softly. She took the oath, her hand steady on the Bible. She looked small, almost fragile, but determined. I searched her face for answers, for any sign of recognition, but she gave none. The prosecutor began his questioning, slowly building the narrative. Mrs. Petrikis, he began gently. Could you tell the court where you were on the evening Herr Vangelis went missing? I was delivering bread to the taverna by the old windmill. Theodota replied, her voice soft but clear. It was late, past sunset. I remembered Captain Yarani's confirming the bakery deliveries usually finished much earlier. A small knot of unease tightened in my gut. And did you see anyone near the old windmill that night? Theodota hesitated, her gaze flicking towards me for a split second. A flash of something, fear, regret, before settling back on the prosecutor. Yes, I did. Who did you see, Mrs. Patricus? She swallowed hard. I saw Sophia Vitalis. The room buzzed with murmurs, my own heart hammered. This was it, the first hook. And what did you observe, Mrs. Patricus, between Miss Patelis and Herr Evangelist? Her voice, though still quiet, gained a strange conviction. They were arguing about the tour, about money. Katerina objected, but the judge allowed it. The prosecutor pressed on, his voice growing firmer. And what happened then, Mrs. Patricus? Theodota paused, her eyes searching mine again. This time, there was a palpable sadness there, almost an apology, but her words were a hammer blow. I saw her push him. The courtroom erupted. My world began to spin. Katerina's shouts, the judge's gavel. It was all a distant roar. Push him. Theodota, my quiet, religious neighbor, had just condemned me. Why would you lie like this? After the bailiff restored order, the cross-examination began. Katerina was relentless, poking holes in Theodota's story. Mrs. Patricus, Katerina said, her voice sharp. You claim you were delivering bread past sunset. Isn't it true that your bakery closes hours before dark? Theodota clutched her hands together. Sometimes there are late orders. Late orders for a taverna directly next to the old windmill, a place you rarely visit, at dusk. Isn't it true you prefer to be home before dark? For religious reasons? Katerina pressed. Theodota's face flushed. I had to go. It was flimsy, but Theodota stuck to her story. Her conviction, however strained, held, and the image she painted, me, arguing, pushing, it was vivid, damning. Later that evening, Captain Yaranis visited me in the small holding room. He looked tired, his usual cheerful demeanor gone. Sophia, he began, I don't understand this. Theodota has always been a truthful woman. She's lying, Yaranis. I snapped, my voice raw with frustration. I never saw Herr Evangelist that night, and I certainly didn't push him. He sighed, running a hand through his gray hair. I believe you, but her testimony, it's strong. She's so sure. She's scared, I said, a sudden thought sparking in my mind. Someone made her do this. Someone put her up to it. He looked at me, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. Who would do that? Sophia, and why? I saw the matron's charming smile, heard his smooth voice. The matron's I said, the name a bitter taste on my tongue. He wants the old windmill. He wants my business. This is his way of getting it. Captain Yaranis frowned. Demetrius Nicolaides is a powerful man, Sophia, and he's been nothing but helpful during the investigation. Helpful? I scoffed. He's been poisoning everyone against me, subtly. He offered to help me sell the business, clear my name. I'll look into it, Yaranis promised, but his voice lacked conviction. He was my friend, but Demetrius had influence. I spent the next few days in a haze of fear and fury. My life was being ripped apart. Brick by brick, my tour bookings vanished. Locals whispered behind their hands. The thought of losing the old windmill, my family's legacy, was a knife twist. I had to fight. Katerina tried to find other witnesses, anyone who could contradict Theodota, but Katerina was a small island. Most people went home early. No one else was near the old windmill that night. The only other person who claimed to have seen anything was Demetrius. He testified that he saw me arguing with Herr Evangelist earlier that day. On the tour, creating a motive, it was subtle, perfectly placed to reinforce Theodota's lie without directly committing perjury himself. He was a master manipulator. The only way to break Theodota's lie was to find out why she was lying, and I had a gut feeling it had something to do with Demetrius. I started piecing things together. Demetrius had opened a new, expensive hotel on the other side of the island. It was struggling, whispered Katerina's assistant. He was desperate for money. He wanted Patetery to be his island, not mine. I remember a small detail. Theodota's son Nikos had been studying abroad, but his scholarship was mysteriously revoked a few months ago. He'd returned home suddenly, withdrawn and anxious. Demetrius had a habit of helping people. Could he have offered Nikos a job or financial assistance in exchange for Theodota's cooperation? It felt too direct, too simple. Demetrius was never simple. Then I remembered Captain Yarany's early reports. Revengestories had a small, unique silver locket on him. It was found next to his body. It was an antique, a family heirloom he never took off. The police have documented it, but when I asked Katerina if it had been presented as evidence, she said no. It wasn't relevant to the cause of death, she explained. Not relevant to their cause of death, but what if it was relevant to Theodota's lie? I called Captain Yarany's that locket, Evangelist's locket. Could you get me a photo of it, the one found at the scene? He sounded hesitant. Sophia, it's just a locket. It won't help your case. Please, Yarany's, I pleaded. Just a photo for me. He agreed, reluctantly. The photo arrived an hour later. It showed the locket, old and tarnished, with a distinctive, slightly bent clasp and a tiny engraving, almost invisible, on the back. It looked like two small, entwined serpents. It clicked. Theodota was obsessed with the local folklore of the Gorgon, a mythical creature with snakes for hair. She wore a small silver pendant of two entwined serpents, a common protective symbol in Kateri, almost identical to the one on the locket, except hers was pristine. She believed it kept her safe. She was superstitious. Why would she be out at the old windmill at night, a place she considered isolated and even a little unclean due to its history of pagan rituals? Especially if she was so devout. I knew the answer. Someone made her go there, and that someone had to be Demetrius. But how could I prove it? The closing arguments loomed. Katerina was worried. Sophia, without direct evidence against Demetrius, Theodota's testimony is crushing. We need something to break her. I have an idea, I said, a cold resolve settling in my chest. But I need your help. We need to call a final rebuttal witness. Katerina looked shocked. Who? Demetrius Nicolaides. She stared at me. Sophia, he already testified, and he's not on our witness list. He volunteered to testify for the prosecution. He can be recalled. We need to ask him about Theodota and about that locket. Katerina eventually agreed. Seeing the desperation in my eyes, she filed the motion, citing newly discovered evidence. The judge, intrigued, allowed it. The next morning, the air in the courtroom felt thick, heavy with anticipation. The prosecutor, confident, delivered his closing statement, hammering home Theodota's unimpeachable testimony. Then Katerina stood. The defense calls Demetrius Nicolaides to the stand. A ripple of shock went through the gallery. Demetrius, ever composed, strode confidently forward. He took the oath, a smooth, practiced movement. His eyes met mine, a flicker of smug triumph there. He believed he had won. Katerina began her questioning. Mr. Nicolaides, you testified earlier that you saw Miss Patelis arguing with Herr Vangelis on the day of his disappearance, correct? Yes, I did, Demetrius confirmed, his voice calm. And you also stated that you have no direct knowledge of what transpired later that evening at the old windmill? That is correct. So you would have no reason to fabricate a story, or to coerce anyone else to, regarding Ms. Patelis' actions? Demetrius chuckled softly. Of course not. Why would I? Indeed, Katerina said, her voice dropping, a dangerous edge appearing. Now, Mr. Nicolaides, you are a businessman, correct? With many investments, including a new hotel on the far side of the island. Yes, he confirmed, a slight frown creasing his brow. And isn't it true, Mr. Nicolaides, that your new hotel has been experiencing some financial difficulties? The prosecutor objected, but Katerina argued its relevance to motive. The judge allowed it. Demetrius' composure wavered. All new businesses have initial challenges. Challenges that could be solved by acquiring valuable land and expanding your operations. Perhaps even buying out competitors like Ms. Patelis, correct? I offered to help Ms. Patelis. Yes, he said, regaining some control. A fair offer. Katerina nodded, then pulled out the photograph of her evangelist locket. Mr. Nicolaides, do you recognize this item? Demetrius glanced at the photo. It appears to be a locket. It is her evangelist locket, Katerina stated, found at the scene. And do you notice the small engraving on the back? She projected an enlarged image of the locket onto a screen. The entwined serpents were clear. Demetrius narrowed his eyes. I don't see how this is relevant. Perhaps not to you, Katerina said, turning to face the jury, but it is highly relevant to Mrs. Patricus, the prosecution's star witness. She then called Theodota back to the stand, a surprise move that sent a fresh wave of whispers through the court. Theodota looked terrified. Mrs. Patricus, Katerina began, her voice gentle this time. You testified you saw Sophia Patelis push her evangelist at the old windmill. Theodota swallowed, her gaze darting towards Demetrius, who was now watching her with a steely intensity. Yes. Mrs. Patricus, you're a devout woman, are you not? And highly superstitious? Theodota looked confused. Yes. And you have a particular fear of the Gorgon and places associated with pagan symbols, do you not? You even wear a protective charm, similar to the one on her evangelist's locket, to ward off such evil. Katerina paused. You would never willingly go to the old windmill, especially at night, unless you were forced, would you? Theodota's face crumpled, her eyes filled with tears. Tell us, Mrs. Patricus, Katerina pressed, her voice kind but firm. Did Mr. Nicolaides threaten you? Did he promise to help your son Nikos, whose scholarship was revoked, if you testified against Sophia? Did he tell you to go to the old windmill and lie about what you saw? Demetrius shot to his feet. Objection. This is outrageous speculation. No, Theodota whispered, her voice shaking but clear enough for everyone to hear. It's not speculation. The courtroom went silent. Demetrius stood frozen, his face a mask of disbelief. He told me, Theodota continued, tears streaming down her face. He said if I didn't say what he told me, Nikos would lose his job at his new hotel, that he'd make sure Nikos never worked on this island again. He said he saw me near the old windmill that night, and if I didn't say I saw Sophia, he would say I pushed her evangelist. He said he had proof. She pointed at Demetrius, her hand trembling. He told me to go, to see, to lie. The truth detonated in the courtroom. Demetrius, the charming benefactor, was exposed as a blackmailer, twisting a fearful woman's love for her son into a weapon. His mock confidence evaporated, replaced by a cold, furious shock. He understood then. He had been so focused on me, he hadn't seen the small, frightened woman he'd coerced become the key to his undoing. The verdict came swiftly. The jury, after a short deliberation, found me not guilty. The judge then announced an immediate investigation into Demetrius Nicolaides for witness tampering and obstruction of justice. He was led away, his expensive suit now seeming like a cage. I stood there, free. My name finally blared. The sun streaming through the courtroom window felt warmer. The air lighter. Justice had been served, not just legally, but morally. The quiet woman's lie, born of fear, had become the truth that brought down a powerful, manipulative man. My small island, my simple life, had fought back and won. The truth always finds a way, even on the quietest of islands. Next, on the witness lie, a grieving widow claims she saw ghosts, but the truth is far more chilling.